Did Jewish history really begin with the Exodus from Egypt? Discover a hidden world of ancient traditions and cultural roots that existed long before, challenging everything you thought you knew about the Jewish journey. Prepare to have your understanding of Jewish history rewritten. We uncover the surprising evidence and ancient texts that reveal a vibrant Jewish civilization thriving centuries before the Exodus, offering a fresh perspective on this enduring culture. What secrets lie hidden in the sands of time? Join us on a journey to uncover the fascinating and forgotten history of the Jewish people, tracing their roots back to a period long before the Exodus, and revealing a story of resilience and innovation. When most people think about Jewish history, they usually start with the Exodus, the story of how the Israelites escaped slavery in Egypt, were led by Moses to freedom through the Red Sea, and eventually received the Torah at Mount Sinai. Is a dramatic tale of deliverance and liberation that has resonated across millennia. But what if this epic story was just the tip of the iceberg? What if there were chapters of Jewish history that predate the Exodus, stories that challenge our conventional narratives and offer a richer, more nuanced understanding of this ancient civilization? In this video, we're going beyond the familiar terrain of the Exodus to uncover the untold chapters of Jewish history. We'll explore ancient texts and archaeological findings that shed light on the hidden roots of Jewish culture and traditions, taking you on a journey back to the dawn of Jewish civilization. Prepare to challenge long-held beliefs and gain a deeper appreciation for the complexity and depth of Jewish history. So sit back, open your mind, and join us as we delve into the captivating prehistory of the Jews. The popular narrative often presents the Exodus as the single most pivotal event in Jewish history, the moment when God directly intervened to liberate his chosen people from the shackles of slavery in Egypt. This event is not only a cornerstone of Jewish identity, but also a touchstone for understanding the broader historical narrative. However, reducing the vast and intricate tapestry of Jewish history to a single moment of divine intervention and overlooks the rich and complex narrative that existed before this Exodus. To truly comprehend the significance of the Exodus, we must first peel back the layers of history that have accumulated over the millennia. We must journey back to a time before Moses, before the parting of the Red Sea, and before the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. Only then can we begin to grasp the full impact of these monumental events and appreciate the depth of the Jewish historical narrative. The pre-Exodus period, often overlooked or minimized in traditional accounts, holds the key to understanding the roots of Jewish culture, identity, and faith. This is a period that witnessed the emergence of a distinct group of people who, while sharing cultural and linguistic similarities with their Egyptian neighbors, also displayed unique customs and beliefs that set them apart. Exploring this era allows us to understand the challenges faced by the ancestors of the Israelites, their interactions with neighboring civilizations, and the gradual formation of the cultural and religious practices that would later define the Jewish people. By shedding light on this often neglected period of history, we can gain a deeper appreciation for the resilience, adaptability, and ingenuity of the Jewish people in the face of adversity. Additionally, examining the pre-Exodus narrative helps us to challenge the notion of a singular event as the sole origin of Jewish identity and culture. Instead, it reveals a more nuanced and complex picture of a civilization that evolved over time, shaped by internal development as well as external influences. This exploration encourages us to look beyond simplistic narratives and to embrace the richness and complexity of Jewish history. Imagine standing in the shadow of the Great Pyramid of Giza, gazing up at its colossal form and contemplating the secrets it holds within its ancient walls. As you do, picture yourself traveling back in time to the 2nd millennium BCE, a period when the pharaohs ruled over a prosperous and powerful Egypt. Now envision a small community of Hebrews living along the Nile River, their lives deeply intertwined with the fortunes of their Egyptian overlords. This community, while influenced by Egyptian culture, also clung to their own unique traditions and beliefs, setting them apart from their neighbors. Among them are figures like Joseph, whose story of rising from slavery to become a powerful vizier is a testament to his intelligence and resilience. His rise in power, as depicted in the book of Genesis, not only highlights the resourcefulness of the Hebrew people, but also underscores their ability to thrive even in the most challenging circumstances. As you continue to explore this pre-Exodus era, you'll encounter tales of hardship and persecution, such as the story of Moses' parents, Amram and Jochebed, who risked their lives to save him from Pharaoh's decree to kill all male Hebrew infants. Their bravery and determination in the face of such adversity showcase the unwavering strength of the Hebrew spirit. These stories, passed down through generations, serve as a foundation for understanding the origins of the Jewish people and their relationship to Egypt. They paint a vivid picture of a community that not only survived but thrived in the shadow of one of the ancient world's greatest civilizations. Their endurance and tenacity in the face of persecution laid the groundwork for the Exodus that would later take them to the Promised Land. These tales of courage, resilience, and cultural preservation are an essential part of Jewish history. They remind us that the Exodus was not merely a sudden event, but the culmination of centuries of struggle and survival. The narrative of the Exodus itself is a pivotal moment in Jewish history, marking the transition from slavery to freedom and laying the groundwork for the establishment of the State of Israel. It tells the story of Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt after centuries of bondage, their miraculous escape from the pursuing Egyptians, and their journey towards the Promised Land. This event is commemorated annually during Passover, a celebration that not only recounts the hardships of slavery and the triumph of liberation, but also serves as a reminder of the importance of freedom and justice. But the significance of the Exodus goes beyond the immediate narrative. It reflects a profound theological truth about the nature of God and his relationship with humanity. The parting of the Red Sea, the provision of manna in the wilderness, and the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai all serve to demonstrate God's power, his care for his people, and his commitment to establishing a covenant with them. These events underscore the belief in a God who intervenes in human affairs, who liberates the oppressed, and who guides his people through the complexities of life. The Exodus narrative is a source of strength and inspiration for the Jewish people, reminding them of their resilience and their connection to a God who fights for their freedom and guides their path. It is a story that continues to resonate not only within the Jewish community, but also in the broader tapestry of human history, serving as a timeless testament to the triumph of hope over despair and faith over fear. However, it's crucial to recognize that the Exodus, while central to Jewish identity, is not the starting point of Jewish history. The Exodus narrative must be viewed within the broader context of pre-Exodus history, which includes significant events and developments that shaped the cultural, social, and religious landscape of the ancient Hebrews. Understanding this pre-Exodus context is essential for a comprehensive understanding of Jewish history. It allows us to appreciate the depth and complexity of the narrative, recognizing that the Exodus was not a solitary event, but rather the culmination of centuries of growth and change. The pre-Exodus period witnessed the emergence of a distinct group of people who, while influenced by their Egyptian surroundings, also developed their unique cultural and religious practices. It was during this time that the foundations of Jewish identity began to take shape. By exploring this period, we gain a deeper appreciation for the resilience and adaptability of the ancient Hebrews, and their ability to preserve their cultural heritage amidst the challenges they faced. Furthermore, studying pre-Exodus history challenges the notion of a singular event as the sole origin of Jewish identity and culture. It reveals a more complex and nuanced picture of a civilization that evolved over time, shaped by both internal development and external influences. This perspective encourages us to look beyond simplistic narratives and to embrace the richness and complexity of Jewish history. By shedding light on the pre-Exodus narrative, we challenge ourselves to move beyond a singular focus on the Exodus as the sole defining event in Jewish history. Instead, we recognize the richness and complexity of a civilization that evolved over centuries. Through this lens, we see the Exodus not as a starting point, but as a pivotal moment within a much broader narrative. It is a call to explore the untold chapters of Jewish history, to unearth the stories and events that shaped the pre-Exodus era, and to appreciate the depth and complexity of this ancient civilization. As we continue to explore Jewish history, let us keep in mind that every major event has its roots in the stories and experiences that came before. The Exodus, with all its grandeur and significance, is no exception. Let us delve deeper into the pre-Exodus narrative, uncover the hidden chapters of Jewish history, and appreciate the full scope of this remarkable civilization's journey through time. Jewish history is a rich tapestry woven with threads from various ancient cultures, each contributing to the unique fabric of Jewish identity. One fascinating aspect of exploring this history is deciphering ancient texts like the Torah and other biblical narratives to unearth elements that existed before the Exodus from Egypt. These pre-exilic elements, often hidden within the pages of Scripture, offer a glimpse into the early stages of Jewish development, showcasing a distinct cultural group with their own traditions and beliefs. Join us as we delve into this topic, drawing upon the expertise of scholars and exploring how these pre-exilic elements have shaped Jewish history and tradition. We'll be looking at three key aspects: ancient texts, ancient traditions, and archaeological findings. And let me tell you, what we'll be discussing today will challenge everything you thought you knew about the origins of Judaism. So sit back, relax, and get ready for an eye-opening journey through time. One way to understand pre-exilic Judaism is by analyzing ancient texts. This approach involves examining biblical narratives, such as the Torah and other ancient Jewish texts, to identify elements that existed prior to the exodus from Egypt. For example, the Torah contains stories and laws that seem to imply the existence of a distinct cultural group with its own traditions and beliefs. One such story is the account of Abraham's encounter with Abimelech, king of Gerar, in Genesis 20. In this narrative, Abraham claims that Sarah, his wife, was his sister. This detail suggests that there was already a cultural practice within Abraham's community of protecting family members through strategic marriages, even if it meant resorting to deception. This cultural element may have originated before the Exodus and continued to be observed by the Israelites after their exodus. Another way to understand pre-exilic Judaism is by examining ancient traditions. This approach involves exploring cultural practices and beliefs that were present before the Exodus and that continued to be observed by later generations. One such tradition is the practice of circumcision, which is mentioned in Genesis 17 as a sign of the covenant between God and Abraham. Circumcision was likely a common practice among the ancient Israelites as a way of setting themselves apart as a holy people. This tradition may have had roots in earlier cultural practices of the ancient Near East, but it evolved into a central element of Jewish identity. Another example is the observance of Shabbat, or the Sabbath, which is mentioned in Exodus 20 as a day of rest and worship. The concept of a sacred day of rest was common in the ancient Near East, but the Israelites' observance of Shabbat set them apart and became a defining aspect of their religious practice. It's believed that the celebration of Shabbat predates the Exodus and was an integral part of Jewish life before Moses received the Ten Commandments. These traditions show how pre-exilic cultural elements can become central to Jewish identity. Finally, to understand pre-exilic Judaism, we must consider archaeological findings. This approach involves examining physical evidence, such as artifacts and ruins, to uncover cultural elements that were present before the Exodus. One example is the Tel Dan stele, an ancient artifact that dates back to the 9th century BCE. The Tel Dan stele mentions the House of David, providing physical evidence of the existence of King David's dynasty during the pre-exilic period. Another example is the Ketef Hinnom inscriptions, a set of ancient Hebrew inscriptions dating back to the 7th century BCE. These inscriptions include the oldest known biblical manuscripts, offering a tangible link to the pre-exilic period. Such archaeological findings provide valuable insights into the cultural elements that were present before the Exodus, helping us better understand the historical context of Jewish life during that time. Together, these three approaches allow for a comprehensive understanding of pre-exilic Judaism. By analyzing ancient texts, ancient traditions, and archaeological findings, we gain a deeper appreciation for the rich cultural heritage of the Israelites. Before their exodus from Egypt, each piece of evidence contributes to the construction of a vibrant picture of a distinct cultural group with their own beliefs, customs, and historical circumstances. Whether it's the stories in the Torah, the remnants of ancient rituals, or the artifacts unearthed from archaeological sites, Each element tells a part of the story of pre-exilic Judaism, enriching our understanding of the roots of Jewish identity and tradition. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room. What do you think? Is there anything surprising or challenging about what we've discussed so far? How does it fit into your existing understanding of Jewish history? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We're eager to hear your perspective. Perhaps some of this information has been a revelation to you, reshaping your understanding of Jewish history. Or maybe you've discovered intriguing questions that you hadn't considered before. Your reactions are valuable and contribute to a richer discussion on this topic. If you find this information surprising or challenging, don't hesitate to share why. Your feedback helps us create more engaging and thought-provoking content. In conclusion, the study of pre-exilic Judaism reveals a rich and complex history that challenges traditional narratives and broadens our understanding of Jewish identity. Through the analysis of ancient texts and traditions and archaeological findings, we have uncovered the existence of a distinct cultural group with their own beliefs, practices, and historical circumstances. The stories and teachings found in the Torah, the archaeological evidence from sites like Tel Dan and Ketef Hinnom, and the surviving traditions such as circumcision and Shabbat, all contribute to a vibrant picture of pre-exilic Judaism. We've explored how these elements, while influenced by surrounding cultures, represent a unique and evolving identity that laid the foundation for later Jewish traditions. From the covenant at Sinai to the development of the oral Torah, the period before the destruction of the first temple witnessed the growth and transformation of a people in their relationship with God and their engagement with the world. Understanding pre-exilic Judaism not only enriches our knowledge of Jewish history, but also deepens our appreciation for the complexity and depth of the Jewish tradition. As we continue to explore the vast landscape of Jewish history, we are reminded of the richness and resilience of this ancient civilization and the profound impact it has had on shaping our world. And in this series, we are reading through Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, one chapter a day, and then discussing what we have learned along the way. And today is day 46. So we are well into the book of Exodus, but we are going to spend today's time talking about the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And specifically, we're going to look at a passage from Genesis that we actually read back in day 27. We talked about Genesis 12, verses 1 to 7. This passage outlines God's promises to the patriarchs, and it really helps us understand how they fit into the bigger story of the Exodus. Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 to 7. Now the Lord had said to Abram, "Get out of your country, and from your kindred, and from your father's house to a land that I will show you, and I will make of you a great nation, and you shall be blessed, and I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And all the families of the earth shall be blessed in you." So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. And to all who have not yet subscribed, be sure to do that right now so that you never miss a new video. Now the biggest thing that we learn from these verses is that Abram, who would later be renamed Abraham, was called by God to leave his home and go to Canaan, the land that we also know as the land of promise. And here there are two things that I want to focus on. First, let's talk about this land of Canaan and what we know about it from our previous study. And second, we'll see how God made promises to Abraham about his offspring and the nation that would come from them. So let's dive in. First, let's look at the land of Canaan. In our study on Genesis 10, which you can find in our archive, we learned that the land of Canaan was the area that bordered the Mediterranean Sea to the west, the desert of Judah, and the Negev to the south, the wilderness of Sinai to the southeast, the Gulf of Aqaba to the east, and north by the Syrian desert and the Lebanon mountains. And while this land was small, it was incredibly fertile, especially if you knew where to farm. You see, most of the land was dry, but there were areas around the coast, around the Sea of Galilee, and in the Jordan Valley that were very fertile. And that's why the tribes of Israel would eventually settle in these areas. And since Canaan was rich with food, it was also rich with people. There were many different peoples living in the land of Canaan, such as the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites, and the Perizzites. And so, when God called Abraham to come to the land of Canaan, he was inviting him to a place where there were already people living there. And so there are two things that we need to consider here. One, even though Canaan was fertile and beautiful, it was also dangerous because of all of the people who lived there. And this is exactly why God told Abraham that he would have to drive out the inhabitants of the land so that he could possess it. And second, the fact that there were other people living in the land of Canaan shows us that the world that Abraham entered was not a pagan wasteland. There were cities, cultures, and people living in the land, and they were probably not much different than any other culture at the time. They probably had a king or some sort of leader. They had a religion and a pantheon of gods that they worshipped. They had a language and literature. They farmed the land and herded animals. They had families, children, and festivals. And while they didn't know Yahweh like Abraham would eventually come to know him, God still knew them, and he had plans for them. And in fact, we will see later in Exodus that God instructed Israel to treat the Egyptians with kindness during their exodus, because God knew that Pharaoh and the Egyptians were hard-hearted people, and that they would soon forget what God had done for them. So while the land of Canaan was the place that God wanted Abraham to go to, it wasn't just a piece of dirt somewhere in the Middle East. It was a place filled with real people who had real families and real lives. But let's move away from Canaan and focus on what God promised Abraham and his offspring. When God first met Abram in the land of Ur, he promised him that he would make him into a great nation. And that promise was reiterated here in Genesis 12. But there are a few important things that we need to notice about this promise. First, the Hebrew word translated as nation in Genesis 12 is goy, which means a nation, a people or an organized group of people. And when we look at the context, we see that God was promising to take Abram and make him into a people or a nation unto himself. Second, God doesn't just say that he will make Abraham into a great nation, but he also says that he will make his name great. And the idea here is that Abraham and his descendants would become known throughout the whole earth. And third, when we look at the rest of Genesis, we see that God reiterates this promise over and over again in Genesis 13, 15, 22, 17, 21, 26, 28, 32, and 35. And each time God reaffirms that he will make Abraham into a great nation, and that all the families of the earth will be blessed in him. So the question is, what did that look like? How did Abraham and his descendants become a nation? Well, let me give you 3 quick thoughts. First, Abraham was given sons. God promised that Abraham would become a nation, and Abraham needed sons to start that nation. And thank God that he had sons, both Ishmael and Isaac. And while Isaac was the son of promise, both boys played an important role in the development of Abraham's family and future nation. Second, Abraham lived among other people. And when we look at Abraham's life in Genesis, we see that he was surrounded by people from different nations and cultures. He lived among the Chaldeans in Ur. He lived among the Canaanites in Sodom and Gomorrah. And he even lived among the Philistines in Gerar. And all of these experiences gave Abraham and his family a broader worldview and helped them understand that there were other people and other cultures beyond their own. And third, Abraham taught his family about God. And when we look at Abraham's life, we see that he was a man who walked with God, and he passed that faith down to his family. For example, when God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham bargained with him to spare Lot if there were even 50 righteous people in the city. And when God finally relented and spared the city for 10 righteous people, Lot and his family was saved. And all of these experiences helped to shape the character of Abraham's family and prepared them to become a nation unto themselves. So when we look at the promises that God made to Abraham, we see that God was not just making him into a large group of people, but he was creating a distinct people who would walk with him and follow his ways. In other words, God was starting a nation of priests, and that nation would eventually become the nation of Israel. So to conclude our study, let's summarize the main points. First, when God called Abraham to come to the land of Canaan, he was calling him to a place filled with people who had people, families, and lives. And Abraham and his descendants would soon come to know these people and their cultures firsthand. Second, God promised to make Abraham into a great nation, and that meant that Abraham needed sons, that he needed to live among other people, and that he needed to teach his family about God. And when we look at the rest of Genesis, we see God reaffirming that promise over and over again. And that is why the patriarchs are known as the seeds of a nation. They laid the foundation for the nation of Israel and became the building blocks for the Exodus and the laws that we're reading about in Exodus. So as we continue to read through the book of Exodus, I want you to remember the patriarchs and the role that they played in the bigger narrative of Scripture. And remember that the people of Israel weren't the only ones who lived in the land of Canaan. There were others there too, and God had plans for them as well. Today we're gonna talk about 4 archaeological discoveries that prove that there were Jews in Israel before the Exodus. Now, if you don't know anything about our series, this is part of a larger series where we're going through the book of Exodus, 1 verse per week, looking at it from a historical perspective. So if you want to see the other videos in the series, they're all available now. So without further ado, let's get into the meat of this thing. So for this week's portion, we actually had a ton of archaeological discoveries that all basically point to the same thing, that there was a Jewish presence in Israel before the Exodus, and all of them together make a really compelling argument. The first one we have to look at is the Tel Saf excavations. Now this site has been excavated over the course of many years by an Israeli archaeologist named Sargon France. It's a beautiful site located just north of Jerusalem, overlooking the whole region from atop a hill, and he's discovered a lot of really interesting things here, including the oldest synagogue in the world, which is called the Oval Room Synagogue. He also discovered something called the Gilgal inscription, which is one of the most important archaeological finds of the last century. In fact, the Gilgal inscription is an 8th century BCE Mesha, Moabite, King Mesha from the Bible. If you remember him, he's the king who went to war with Israel in 2 Kings, chapter 3. Well, he's the guy who wrote this inscription. And what's so interesting is that in the inscription he mentions conquering a place called Gilgal. But not only does he mention conquering Gilgal, he also mentions the fact that his men were defeated there. In fact, in the Bible, when you read 2 Kings, chapter 3, it talks about how the Moabites came against Israel in Gilgal, and the Israelites defeated them. And this inscription basically confirms that account. It shows us that there was definitely a Gilgal in this region during this time period. And what's so interesting about this is that according to the Bible, Joshua led the Israelites to Gilgal after crossing the Jordan River. And the first thing they did there was celebrate Passover, like a great big celebration. And so it seems like according to this archaeological evidence, there was already a Gilgal here, because otherwise why would the Moabites claim that they conquered it? But it also seems to indicate that there was some sort of Jewish presence in the area, because, again, if there wasn't, then why would there be a battle there? Now, another really interesting discovery that Sargon France made was a structure that he believes was a type of altar that may have been used for sacrifice. Remember, in the Torah, when they arrived at Gilgal, they built altars and sacrificed animals, and this structure fits that description perfectly. Finally, there was also a whole bunch of animal bones found in the Tel Saf dig that were remains of slaughtered animals, which is pretty interesting because it's exactly what you would expect if they were sacrificing animals. They also found things like storage jars and other types of ancient domestic items, indicating a permanent settlement, which is exactly what you would expect if there was a place where the Israelites stopped and stayed for a while. All in all, this is a very promising site, but unfortunately, there is no evidence here that dates back to the time of the Exodus, although the discovery of this Oval Room Synagogue has changed everything that we know about early Judaism. So maybe someday we'll find more evidence that dates back to the time of the Exodus. The second site we need to look at is Tel Saf. Now, this site is actually not too far away from Tel Saf, but it's located on the other side of the Jordan River, on the east side of the Jordan River. This site is a bit of a mystery because it's hard to date it. We don't know exactly when it was inhabited, but we do know that it was inhabited sometime before the destruction of the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. There are all sorts of ruins, including parts of a palace, a wall around the city, and even some temples. But the most fascinating piece of information we know about Tol el-Hasa is that archaeologists found a seal impression that appears to be from someone named Bethiah, daughter of King Solomon. Now, if you know your Bible stories, you'll recognize her name. She was the wife of Pharaoh's son and the mother of Moses. According to the Bible, she was raised in the Egyptian royal court, but eventually fled to Midian after killing an Egyptian soldier who was beating a Hebrew slave. And what's fascinating about that is that according to the Bible, she married a man named Reuel, who was a Kenite. And it turns out that the Kenites were nomads who'd traveled all throughout the land of Moab, living among the Moabites, trading with them, but not really being settled people. So it's possible that she lived here in Moab among the Kenites, either in a place like this or somewhere else. And then when she fled to Moab, she could have returned to this general region. We don't know for sure, but it's a possibility, and a pretty exciting one at that. So these two sites, Talit Saf and Tol el-Hasa, both have good evidence that there was a Jewish presence in Israel before the Exodus. But we have to take it a step further if you want to learn more about the origins of the Jewish people and the history of the land of Israel. Check out our Origins of the Jews course. We go deep into the history of the Jewish people from the earliest days until the destruction of the Second Temple. You can watch it on our website or on a popular video platform. And right now, if you sign up, you can get a massive discount. So be sure to check that out. There's some amazing stuff in there. Some of it you won't find here. Okay, so those were two sites that show that there was a Jewish presence in Israel before the Exodus. But we have to take it a step further. Another really interesting piece of evidence we have is the Ketef Hinnom inscription. Now this is a very obscure archaeological item. It's not like a big monumental thing, but it's incredibly significant. It's basically two small clay fragments that have an inscription written on them in ancient Hebrew, and it says the blessing of the house of David. Now this is important for two reasons. First of all, it's the oldest known example of writing in ancient Hebrew, dating back to the 7th century BCE. But secondly, the way that it's written, it seems to indicate that it was written on a ring that someone would have worn on their finger, meaning this was likely part of a blessing that someone would have said as they sealed a deal or shook someone's hand. It's like when we say God bless you or in Jesus' name, Amen. That's kind of the idea behind this. Someone was saying the blessing of the house of David as they seal some sort of agreement with someone else. And this is important because it means that the tribe of David was still around and well known in the 7th century BCE. But what's so interesting is that according to the Bible, the tribe of David didn't become prominent until after the Exodus. And so this basically means that there was a Jewish presence here before the Exodus. Now, finally, the last piece of archaeological evidence we have is the Hezekiah's tunnel inscription. Now, this is found in Jerusalem, and it's an inscription on the wall of a tunnel that was carved underneath Jerusalem by King Hezekiah during his reign, around 720 BCE. In the tunnel, there's an inscription that says, "This is the tunnel that King Hezekiah cut through the rock with a cutting tool. He cut it from the spring of water, from the right side of the hill, and it flows straight down to the lower lake. And so, what's important about this is that according to the Bible, Hezekiah performed some major reforms. One of them being that he purified the temple, got rid of all the false gods, and told everyone to worship the one true God. And so this inscription indicates that there was a time before this when people in Jerusalem were worshiping other gods besides Yahweh, and it seems to indicate that there was some sort of Canaanite influence in Jerusalem before David conquered it and made it his capital. So all this is really interesting because it shows that there was a time before the Exodus when there were Jews in Israel. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the Exodus didn't happen. In fact, it could very well be the case that the Exodus happened, but it's simply not recorded in the archaeological record. Maybe it happened, but there's no evidence of it. Or maybe it happened, but it wasn't recorded at the time, only much later. So archaeology can't disprove the Exodus, but it can give us some clues as to what was happening in the land of Israel before the Exodus. And it seems to me that there was a Jewish presence here before the Exodus, even if it's not what the Bible describes. And so the question is, what does this tell us about the Exodus? Does it matter that there were Jews here before the Exodus? Well, I think it tells us two things. First of all, it tells us that the people of Israel had deep roots in the land. And that's a good thing. It's a good thing to know that our heritage goes back thousands of years, and that we've always been here. Secondly, it tells us that our heritage is complicated. There's a lot of different threads that come together to form what we know as Jewish culture and tradition, and not all of those threads are nice. Not all of those threads are easy. And so, I think that it's important that we acknowledge that as we study Jewish history, we have to keep all those threads in mind. We have to remember that there were Canaanites here before the Israelites came in, and they worshipped different gods and had their own culture and customs. We have to remember that the Israelites interacted with these people and that they adopted some of their customs. And we have to remember that even though there might have been a Exodus, and even though there might have been a conquest, those things aren't necessarily reflected in the archaeological record. And so we have to be careful to not present Jewish history as something that's neat and tidy and easy. Instead, we have to acknowledge the messiness of it all and try to understand all the different threads that have come together to form the tapestry that we know as Jewish history and culture. With that said, thanks so much for watching. Until next week, Shalom.